Few cities tick as many boxes as Porto in Portugal. Are you a food and wine lover? It's got that. Are you obsessed with historic architecture? That too. Are you seeking nature and seascapes? You guessed it, there is plenty of that. From savouring the infamous port wine at local bars to exploring the cobblestone streets of the historic Ribeira district, Porto will quickly earn a place in your travel heart. My husband Ryan and I recently spent 72 incredible hours exploring this city and the surrounding region, so here is a little travel vlog covering exactly what we did, ate and drank, plus a few tips at the end for those planning a trip to Porto. We landed at Porto's Francisco Airport from London on a Sunday afternoon, and after hopping on the metro, we arrived at this incredible food market while we waited to check in. There was so much choice here that all of my decision making went right out the window as I really just wanted to try everything, but we ended up with this sort of melt-in-your-mouth pork roll sandwich. Plus a bunch of snacky bits that just really hit the spot. These desserts were also so unique. This orange cake had kind of like a wet sand texture, which I know sounds a little bit different, but I was actually so obsessed with it. And well, you can't go wrong with a sort of custardy flan. After a pretty quick and affordable Uber, we arrived at our accommodation, which was sort of on the outskirts of the main centre, but only about a 10-minute walk in. I love this location because we were away from the tourist throes of the waterfront and also very close to this more creative neighbourhood to explore. After freshening up, we headed out to do our first little stomp around town, see the buildings and peruse some of the shops. This is always my favourite part of arriving in a new place, having just no plans and seeing where the evening will take you. In this case, it took us to this lovely little cocktail bar where we scored a seat right outside. The bartender recommended the citrus one to start, and that was spot on, but I quickly realised I needed a coffee number as well, so I ordered one of those. As we finished up, it was going on golden hour, so I pulled up the Google map that I had made before our trip and found the closest viewpoint. You get this Google map with more than 100 foodie recommendations and things to do as part of my Porto pocket guide, which is linked in the description, but a little bit more on that later. This viewpoint was a great area. Almost nobody else was there. I saw a big crowd of people gathered across the river, so I figured that was kind of the go-to spot, but I love the peacefulness of this place so much more. For dinner, we ended up at this lovely little wine bar for some delicious tapas and another glass. The owners here were super friendly and the food was great, so I highly recommend this one. And we closed the night out with the first of many pastéis de nata to come. If you are not familiar with these, they are the most delectable little baked custard tarts, and I highly encourage you to eat as many as possible while you are in Porto. So I will pop a list of my favourite spots to try them at on the screen. The next day was our day trip, so we were up bright and early to seize the day and meet our guide. I love this part of a trip because the city always feels so sleepy and peaceful at this time of morning. Today we are off to the Douro Valley, Portugal's picturesque wine country with stunning landscapes, quaint villages and delicious wine tastings to discover. I booked this tour through Get Your Guide, and what I loved about it was that it was a smaller group tour, so the restaurants and wineries we visited were more sort of quaint family-run ones, and it really felt like the perfect mix of having something organised for you without it being touristy and generic. We visited one winery in the morning and one winery in the afternoon, both being incredibly idyllic and laid back, but with super knowledgeable and welcoming hosts. They walked us through their entire wine and port making process while we tasted a fair few drops, of course. I have definitely developed a new appreciation for port after this. In between, we stopped for a traditional lunch in the town of Pinhão, followed by a boat trip out on the river. We scored seats right at the front of the boat, and I loved how different the environment was compared to if you had taken a boat ride in Porto City. And as someone who gets easily seasick, I didn't feel bad 1 ounce, so that was a win, but also maybe it was the wine. Back in Porto that afternoon, and we were exhausted after a full-on day, so we had a quick afternoon nap before heading out in search of gelato. We also stopped by another cocktail bar on my list and capped off the evening with some cheap but delicious eats at this empanadas spot. Porto at twilight really does have the most beautiful atmosphere.
My lies memorized in my heart.
On to day 3, and it was our last full day in Porto, so we really wanted to get as much city exploring in as possible, and I wanted to have a look around the neighbourhood near our accommodation, so we made that our breakfast stop at this lovely little cafe called Hako. When I tell you this French toast was life-changing, I wish I was exaggerating, but I have thought about it at least 16 times since this meal. Ryan also had a beautiful looking shakshuka-ish eggs dish with these giant hunks of sourdough bread. Absolute perfection. There are some lovely artisan and craft stores along the street, so we spent the latter part of the morning just strolling around the shops. There were lots of independent clothing boutiques, a little Japanese shop, and a very cool vintage store, so I spent some money, but I do not regret it at all. We then made our way into Bolhau, which is an area that we hadn't seen yet, and the sun was out, so that meant only one thing, a gelato stop, and this place was fab. I am pretty sure this was pastel de nata flavour. We then found the famous tiled wall that you see in all the photos of Porto, but honestly we didn't linger too much as it was pretty busy and quite a typically generic shopping area too. But if you turn off down the road, you will find this actually incredible food hall. Everything seemed to be impeccable quality, so I was really surprised that it was sort of so quiet and calm at lunchtime. The fruit stands were stunning, so I quickly picked up some orange juice, but then moved on to a glass of rosé while we perused the rest of the food stalls. We settled for a tasting plate of canned fish and sardines, and this really reminded me of my favourite way to travel and eat, which is just to have like 10 different small bites throughout the day instead of 3 really heavy meals. So speaking of small bites, you all know a travel day calls for an afternoon coffee, so we popped into this place that was very vibey and also a coffee lover's dream. They had plenty of options here, including flights of coffee, cold brew, and V60. Next up, we wandered across the bridge to check out the views and also over to this park, which was the busiest sunset spot that we had seen across the way on that first night. We ticked off one of the classic touristy attractions, which was the gondola, €7, and 5 minutes later I rewatched all of the views I missed because I was filming. Very typical Jess. The evening began to set in and it brought with it wine bars and sangria, of course. I was slacking on the planning front here, so we needed to find something for dinner. I settled on booking this spot through the Fork, which meant that we also got a discount. The whole concept was you can either open the envelope, which reveals your menu, or dine in secrecy, and we chose secrecy. It was a lovely 6-course dinner of snacks, fish, meats, and the star of the show, my 10th dessert that day, but I am not complaining.
We'll be dancing on the lawn when it happens. She stands on the sideline, dances slow and looks at me.
I love the feeling of downtown early in the morning before the crowds arrived the other day, so on our final morning in Porto, I dragged Ryan out of bed early again for a stroll around the waterfront. I am really trying to get into the habit of doing this more on our travels because I feel like the memories and feelings you get from being awake before most other people in a new city are one of those few surreal moments in life. But alas, neither of us are morning people, so this is a work in progress. The reward is obviously a pastel de nata, and then our second incredible breakfast of the trip at a cafe called Epoca. Ryan's scrambled eggs were so silky and seemed to just have like half of Italy's Parmigiano Reggiano shaved over the top, while my Turkish eggs were just perfect in every way and so divine looking. I'm really glad the world has moved on from this era of Instagram food and cafes and that we care more about simple, flavoursome and hearty meals like this over, for example, candy floss on pancakes, if you get what I'm saying. And with that, 72 hours in Porto was up and we made our way down to the train station to jump on a train to Lisbon for the next leg of our trip. Now let's run through a few quick tips for travelling to Porto and getting the most out of your time there. But before we jump in, if you like the look of this vlog, I actually have a full Porto pocket guide that you can download linked in the description. It includes all of my planning wrapped into one handy Notion link, a 3-day sample itinerary, day trip experience recommendations, and some off the beaten path alternatives. You also get a Google map that has more than 60 cafe, restaurant, and foodie recommendations, which is really helpful when you are on the go exploring a city and you just want to drop in and eat somewhere. Okay, now let's get into the travel tips. Number 1 is bring good shoes. And I don't just mean any sneakers. Porto's cobblestone streets can get quite steep and windy, and the variation of stones used on the footpath means that you need shoes with really good grip and support so that your ankles don't hurt at the end of the day or you don't slip. Number 2 is that I found Porto to be much more popular right now than I expected, so this means booking things like popular restaurants and attractions more than 2 weeks in advance is a must. And I also suggest factoring this into how you plan your trip. Stay a little bit outside of the main centre, visit the more popular areas earlier in the morning, and just be kind and patient and gracious when interacting with the people that you meet there. Number 3 is that Ubers and Bolts are extremely affordable here, so if you are traveling with a group of people, it will often actually make more sense to get an Uber over just getting individual bus or train tickets, so keep this in mind when you are planning on how you get around. And my final tip is to leave space in your suitcase for shopping. We went carry-on only this time, which sadly meant we couldn't bring that much home, but of all the European countries I have visited so far, Portugal has some of the best shopping when it comes to artisan boutiques, grocery and alcohol goods, and of course homewares and ceramics. I hope you all enjoyed this one. The next travel vlog up will be 72 hours in the stunning city of Lisbon, so stick around for that. Or if you are planning a trip to Italy, check out my full Italy playlist here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!